Okay, hello, welcome back to another video. Today, we're doing something a little different. I say a little different. I used to do this quite regularly, and just because of the extent to which I've got to sort of prepare to do it while I was studying my degree, I kind of fell off of doing these kind of videos. But now that I've got my degree, I've got a little more time to do a bit of research, do a bit of scripting. So we're bringing back, hopefully on a weekly basis, the analysis of some of the most beautiful games of chess ever played. Now, as I'm sure you can see from the faces on the left, we've got Paul Morphy, Louis Charles Mahe de la Bourdonnais, and Adolf Anderssen. We've got some, I think they were all around 1800s, La Bourdonnais a little earlier, Morphy and Anderssen maybe 1850s, something like this. So the majority of the games that I will look at will be from that kind of period. It's the golden period of chess, the romantic period, from the games of which you do really get an understanding for that Mikhail Botvinnik quote, in which he said that chess is the art which expresses the science of logic. But today we're going to have a little look at a game from 1942, played by a man, as I flip the board because the star of our show today is playing black, who is so majestically named Eldarus Leon Dayton. I mean, the first name Eldarus, I can't believe that's gone out of fashion. I might have to have a child just to name them Eldarus. According to an article I read on the English Chess Forum, Dayton was a chess columnist for various New York publications. He was a poet, a political writer. I can't find loads of information on him, and even less on his opponent, who I just have the surname Lewis, although the opponent's relative anonymity will do little to detract from the beauty that you're about to witness over the board. So let's get into our game. Lewis played e4, to which of course Dayton replied with e5. I say of course, I mean obviously there are many other openings: a Sicilian, a Caro-Kann, a French, a Pitts, a flipping Alekhaine's defense, who knows. But as is often standard practice for a lot of these romantic games, it did begin e4, e5. Then we saw knight to f3. Not a whole lot to analyze so far, because after knight c6, bishop c4, the game was an Italian one. Now, as I'm sure many of you will know, there are kind of two main responses to the Italian game. The first being bishop c5, the gioco piano, and the second, and the one that Dayton elected to go for, knight to f6, this two knights defense to the Italian game. So far, so basic. This is theory that people will have seen hundreds of times. In fact, if I check the Lichess database here, yeah, there are nearly 100 million games in this exact position. And that, by the way, is of course just in the Lichess database, which was not around in 1942, surprisingly enough. I'm not sure between working out how to take out Nazi Germany, Winston Churchill was just booting up a Lichess analysis board and having a little look. Anyway, in this position, many of you will be expecting the move knight to g5. This is, if we flip the board and have a little look from White's perspective, this is of course the fried liver. There's a lot of interesting theory here. d5 takes, nf takes, king takes, queen f3, king e6. This is prep to have the king on e6 on move 7. Obviously, it's a famous line for that reason. Knight c3, knight b4. This line can get quite deep. However, we can delete all this nonsense because knight g5 is not what happened here. Neither is the most popular move in the Masters database, d3. This move's played 73% of the time. It's really either d3 or knight g5 in this position. There's also the open variation with d4, but a very reasonable looking move, but one that's not played so often, is kingside castles, and that's precisely what Lewis went for here. Now, this seems like a kind of reasonable approach. Very often, you castle, you can hang the e-pawn, but you get the rook on the open file. This looks like some interesting play. Got the bishop out, got the knight out, got a pawn in the center, and castled kingside in 4 moves as quick as you possibly can. This seems like relatively principled play, and again, if we just appeal to the database here, only 100 games in the Masters database, but in the Lichess database, 10 million games here. In this position, our boy Eldarus went for the critical line, taking the pawn, of course. This is the idea. Then the rook comes to the e-file. Maybe there's some compensation down here. For instance, if this knight just moves, then there's going to be problems here. Maybe not major problems, but at least there's material equality. There's the open e-file, and with white castled and white having a rook on the e-file while black's king's still there, it's not looking ideal. Black would have had to find the only move to take. It's findable, but then there's even problems with like d4 immediately. This doesn't look like a great position for black. Instead, however, after rook to e1, there is of course this move d5, which is precisely what Dayton played. It attacks the bishop, it defends the knight, it claims the full center. This looks pretty good. And for instance, a very natural move for white is just to step back with the bishop, try to maintain this pressure here on f7, keep an eye maybe on the d-pawn as well. And now black does have to answer the question, what are you doing after a simple d3, kicking the knight to then win back the e-pawn? If black's not careful, they try and stabilize the e-pawn. This is clearly going to collapse. If they play like an f6, then there's even problems with d4, for instance, which begins to undermine some stuff. f6, this looks very weak. Everything's very open and pleasant for white. Their king's extremely safe. Their minor pieces, or rather major pieces, sorry, are in the middle. Our king is just looking horrible on e8, and so clearly being sort of defensively minded, trying to build up here, is not the way to go. You move the knight, this still hangs. But of course, in this position, Dayton, with one thing on his mind, pure attack, goes for the immediately compelling bishop to c5. Now, this isn't exactly amazingly hard to find. You threaten f2, your knight's still here, they've moved the rook, and so this is quite soft. And kind of analogous to how, if we look back here, in the fried liver, instead of castles, if they'd gone knight g5, we play that d5 to temporarily hopefully intercept this bishop and not, allow the threat on f7, which is kind of analogous to what we're going for here with the threat on f2, of course. The best move for white here is just to go for d4 and sort of, try and curtail the pressure on here a little bit. If the bishop takes to try and keep this alive, then at this point the knight can just grab the bishop, and even though we maybe get some cool looking ponies for a minute, the pressure down the center is disgraceful. We've lost the immediate compelling tempo on f2, the initiative kind of lost here, and after like an f3, even if we take here and let's say a takes, knight f6, rook here, I mean, it's equal material. Actually, sorry, forgive me, it's not equal material. Black's up a pawn, but it's not like black's got a crushing advantage. You kind of lose the initiative here. Bishop e6 maybe, and white's the one asking questions, playing bishop g5, pinning this, and then there's a lot of pressure here and the rook's open. So after this move d4, of course, bishop takes, you're gonna have to play something else, a pawn takes or a knight takes, which at least temporarily, as in the case with the fried liver, is gonna stop that immediate pressure on f2 and, just give white a second to breathe. Maybe if knight takes here, bishop e3, and then you can kind of get in the way, and even though this looks quite scary right now, there's just a whole lot of pressure on the center here. All the pieces are active. We're still not really castled. I mean, it's a good position for black, don't get me wrong, but white's not in any immediate trouble. Now, I think I should mention here as well, if we're looking at this from the white perspective, there is this other move, which is, another candid move. It seems pretty reasonable. Just go back to f1 with the rook, kind of concede a bit of a loss of tempo there, but at least, you're holding this, and surely they don't want to give up the two minor pieces for the rook and pawn, right? That's never really a good idea. The problem with this move, and the reason that d4 is actually the most resilient, is because d4, it puts a temporary stop to the momentum, the initiative that black's building here. This just responds to the move. It does, in fact, now allow an immediate knight takes f2, which you might not expect to be possible. After rook takes, bishop takes, king takes, there's then e4, and we're stepping forward again. You're compelled as white to make these moves. You go here, now we take. You have to take here, now we take. You have to take here, now we push. You have to move the knight, and there's a cool line here, which is actually reminiscent of something in my own repertoire, but for the white pieces, which is that if the knight goes here, we can go check, and then presuming the king wants to hold on to this pawn, of course, king g1, we then get this crazy bishop g4, and the queen just has no moves. The queen's trapped. You can play, I don't know, like a g3 first, and then queen h5, fine. And you can now give up the knight, but, you're going to give up the knight, save the queen, and just give me a bishop here on f3. It's not going to be a great idea. So rook f1 here doesn't make a load of sense. Instead, d4 is, of course, played by Lewis. Now, in this position, Dayton, or rather, the boy Elderus, I mean, how can I say his surname when his first name is so enjoyable to say? He goes for knight takes d4. Understanding, of course, that if bishop takes, then the knight recaptures. You're going to kind of kill that tempo. This bishop, the softness of f2, is absolutely gorgeous. And now, as I said before, bishop e3 is actually the best move here. Now, bishop e3 is a hard thing to play psychologically, I think. You kind of just concede that black's got a better position. I mean, they've got all the pieces in the center. You're kind of being defensive. You're building up against f2. White, I mean, they've got the safer king. Their king is out the center. They've got the rook on the e-file, which is the thing that's causing them all the problems in the first place. They might as well try and get a little something for it. After the knight moves, there's now a move that white can play, and this gets very, very complicated indeed. But that move is knight takes e5. Of course, the knight that was on c6 defending that e5 pawn is now no longer there. Taking this, I mean, it makes some sense principally if we just look at things in a very static way. We glance at the position, we say, right, as we've been talking about, the rook's on the e-file. We've had an e4, e5 position. Both of the pawns are now gone. The rook's on the e-file, the king's on the e-file. I'm going to open up that e-file. We win the pawn back. I know we're talking as white here. This move definitely seems to make some sense. However, Elderus, Leon, Dayton, unperturbed by the fact that his king's on the e-file. I mean, he could just try and castle here. He would have a better position here. I mean, he's up the pawn, he's got probably superior development here. A bishop e3, and the game continues. You can maybe garner some tempo from the knight. Maybe there's a bishop, or rather, sorry, knight takes b3, get the bishop pair. There's even some tactical considerations that, of course, they can't take here because of this. I don't know. We've got a good position here as black, of course, but does Dayton want that? Does Dayton want a castle with a rook on the e-file and his king on the e-file, and that e-file having just been completely open? Does he want a castle? Absolutely not. He instead elects for the far fancier idea of queen to f6, attacking the knight. We've got a loose pony in the center of the board. Let's develop. Let's get some tempo on it. We're attacking f2. We're attacking this. We're attacking this. The knight's here. Okay, the knight's here was a little bit of an underwhelming way to kind of end that torrent of speech. But the question now is, what does white do? This is where the tragedy of Lewis's position occurs. He identifies himself in this position with the character Macbeth, of the opinion that he is in blood, stepped in so far that should he wade no more, returning were as tedious as go o'er. He feels committed to the attack. He doesn't want to now just play rook f1. He doesn't want to play knight d3 and just try and defend f2. Dayton's the one who hasn't castled here. Dayton's king should be weak, and so Lewis plays bishop takes d5. He says, you know what, take on f2, because my king moves over. I'm nice and safe here in the corner. What are you doing about f7? What are you doing about the fact that your knight's hanging, the fact that this file's open? Very quickly before we continue, this is exactly what happened in the game, but before we continue down that line, it's worth noting that, you know, you can't just pick up the knight here because rook takes e4, then that open e file becomes a major problem. Takes, clearly white's doing very well. Queen takes f2 is the only move here. Any other move gets absolutely rolled with the rook, with the bishop. But as I've said, Lewis calculates that, look, my king's here, I'm safe. You have no immediate attack. It might be nice if your knight could make it to this square, but how's that going to happen when your queen's occupying it? And if your knight moves and you try and do anything fancy here, there's going to be problems with this discovery. f2's hanging. The king is just in the center and open. Mine's nice and tucked away here. I trust the attack. And he's right. He's absolutely right. Except from exactly one move. There is precisely one move here for black. Every other move completely loses. So what is that move? Well, you might initially think, okay, well, I'll just castle out of the way of all of this trouble, but then this knight just hangs. And whatever really happens here, it doesn't seem like black's got a whole lot to do. The engine will confirm black does not really have a whole lot to do. In fact, we've got a +3 valuation for white here. You know, the knight can come back to d3, that's a problem. So, okay, you can't castle, sure. Let's consider some other moves as black. Let's say, okay, the knight f6, we come back here, you know, attack a loose bishop. Obviously, there's going to be knight g4. There's going to be a discovery. The best move's probably to sack the queen here, lest you lose it in a different way. So, okay, well, now this knight is rooted to the spot. We can understand that. It's hanging, but it's also pinned to these ideas of queen g4, or rather knight g4, sorry. So, you know, we can't move the knight. We can't castle. What else might we consider? Well, what about like a queen c2 here, for instance? And if you take, there's going to be a fork here there. You know, rook takes, but maybe we get to pick this up, or probably we should castle first, and then this is going to be won anyway. That looks pretty playable, except from the fact that, of course, after takes here, it's yet again the loose knight here on e4. The bishop takes here, destabilizing this. I mean, you can see why Lewis went for this. Bishop takes here, what are you going to do? I mean, let's say you trade queens, but then at this point, you're just still down a knight for a couple pawns, and black's got no attack. This is held, you're not going in here, there's just no compensation anymore. So, okay, we can't go queen c2, we can't move the knight, we can't castle, maybe you try like a bishop e6, but still this is gonna hang. So finally, I guess, our final try, maybe a bishop f5, we try and stabilize this. However, even in this position, we see takes, and then takes, just winning the piece, and then maybe you can get out of the way, and there's maybe some compensation, but, you know, you're just down a piece here, there's no immediate mating attack or anything, and the problem is the knight can come back to d3, and that is gonna very much suck. It's going to absolutely kill any dreams of, you know, a mate here or something fancy. So we're left in this position. We're left in this unbelievably complex looking position. Nothing really seems to work for black except, as I said, there's precisely one move. If you'd like to pause the video and try and find it, be my guest. You've had a chance to pause. The move here is an absolutely disgusting, and some of you might find this, but have you seen the whole follow-up? Queen to g1. One of the nastiest moves ever played. Why is that? Because this isn't your normal smothered mate, you know? If the bishop was defending the queen, and then the rook had to take the queen, and then the knight could go to f2, you know, if rook takes, there is just knight f2, smothers. Very, very nice, of course. But honestly, even beginners can spot that tactic because they just crush it in Puzzle Rush. It's obviously a famous tactic. The king can take it. You've just lost your queen. This seemed like a blunder. Someone thought, oh, queen here, rook takes, there's mate. Oh, the king can take, I'll resign now. But Elders, Leon, Dayton did not resign, because queen g1 was the best move. The king comes here, we have a discovery here, and even if you spotted queen g1, I'd like you to take a moment and see if you can spot the follow-up move. If you said knight to f3, double check, you're absolutely wrong. Because of course, if here we have another absolutely gorgeous smothers mate, not quite smothers I guess because the rook's not here, but an unbelievable mate with the knights. But the problem is after knight f3, the king can move across, and what are we going to do now? I mean, we can continue giving checks, but the king can just come up, we can give another check, the king can just go across. The attack kind of just runs out of steam. If we castle here, funnily enough, I do believe, yeah, the best move is king c3. They can just keep running. The knights are over here, the king's escaped. I mean, literally king c3 being the best move is comical, but illustrates the fact that we can't let this king run. So instead of knight to f3 in this position, the other double check is the best move. Even the bravest king flees in the face of a double check. And what's the difference with this move? Well, if the king goes here, of course we still have an unbelievably gorgeous double knight mate. And if they play their only other legal move, king to f1 here, then, I mean, it's your choice. Maybe, you know, those of you who didn't find queen g1, didn't find knight e2, take a pause here and try and find this one. This one's a little simpler, still extraordinarily flashy. But of course the move is, in fact there are two, check with the knight. Throwing away the piece, the only legal move is to recapture. You can't go here, you can't move here or here, and a knight check is of course not blockable, and after takes, knight takes g3, it's checkmate. An absolutely disgusting, otherworldly level of game, ending the game down 10 points of material with a 2 minor piece checkmate. I mean, come on. The really beautiful thing about this game, like you might think white played kind of stupidly, but white had to see exactly this sequence for bishop takes to have not been a good idea. If this precise sequence, look, we'll turn on the engine here, queen f2 is mate in 5. Everything else is plus 3.4, plus 3.5, etc., way worse. After queen f2 then, king h1, you have to see queen g1. Any other move still loses for black. Admittedly, there's a little more fight, you know, bishop f5, but we looked at all of that. And then after queen g1, everything else is forced up until mate, of course. But the brilliant thing is that white playing this move, if this precise combination didn't exist on the board, then the original bishop takes d5 would have been absolutely fantastic for white. It's easy, you know, with an engine to look at this and be like, okay, let's turn on the engine here. Oh, you know, white's doing terribly. Even originally, if we go and have a look, let's say this position, castles, oh, well, that's not optimal. Knight takes, rook here, oh, what, you're giving advantage. It's clear because d5, and then bishop here is terrible because you need to go like this and pin the knight such that then when you go bishop c5, d4 happens, and then there's no knight takes d4 because the knight's pinned. It's like in 1942, bishop b3 makes a lot of sense. It seems like a reasonable move. Here, or rather, sorry, here, there's going to be d4. Knight takes, and, you know, they could have sort of played bishop e3 and tried to hold a little more, but actually, unless you see from this position the precise mating idea with queen f2, queen g1, for white, this is a good move. It's not one of those positions where white just got a terrible position and then there was just a fancy finish that black could have gone for. But, you know, if black didn't find that, there were other ways for black to win, therefore white really shouldn't have played the move. It's like, this is the only way forward for black. An unbelievably disgusting game, an unbelievably disgusting checkmate. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this kind of video. Feedback in the comments would be unbelievably appreciated because I do put a little more effort into kind of scripting and analyzing and, you know, researching rather than just sitting down playing a game and sort of talking through my thoughts. It is nice though, because when I sometimes sit down to try and get a good game and then fail for a while, I can basically definitely record this in one take, or, you know, in several takes, because sometimes I have a voice break and need to cut that out. But if this video does reasonably well and if you guys enjoyed this, then I will endeavor to make one of these per week. As, you know, I'm going to try and post every other day on the channel. Occasionally life will get in the way, but, you know, every other day hopefully will be the amount of videos that you can expect. I mean, maybe, you know, 3 to 4 times a week, something like this. One of those, I'm imagining, as long as you guys enjoy this, could be like an in-depth analysis and hopefully, you know, entertaining exposition of a disgraceful and beautiful game from the past. Obviously, in the past, my Emery Tate videos did very well for obvious reasons, and so I'm not expecting that from this kind of video. But as long as my core audience kind of enjoys it and wants more of it, then I will absolutely make it. Let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Join the Patreon if you want to support the channel. You can get your name at the end of the videos, a bonus video every single week, a lifetime discount if you become a patron for over like 3 months for anything I sell on the Patreon, which I'm currently working on at the moment. Just teasing perhaps a little course. Many wonderful things to come in the near future from this channel. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.